Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1976 film Alice, Sweet Alice, and people can consider it a very early slasher because this was pre John Carpenter's Halloween, although after Black Christmas by Bob Clark. It is Giallo-esque in my opinion as well, and apparently it did take some inspiration, especially with like the yellow raincoat, from the Giallo-esque film Don't Look Now, which is a really good film by Nicholas Roeg, which I haven't reviewed, but I really do need to review that at some point. But I did enjoy Alice, Sweet Alice. I had heard a lot of good things about it, and I see why people had said a lot of good things about it. It's pretty surprising, actually, that this isn't talked about more, especially when people do talk about slashers, because people tend to be like, oh, John Carpenter's Halloween was like the first slasher, and then everything after that is a slasher. But, obviously we have Black Christmas, which people do talk about. And Alice, Sweet Alice, I think, should really be talked about now because, like I said, it is pre-Halloween. So, just saying, let's talk about it. Directed by Alfred Sole, who also directed Deep Sleep, Tanya's Island, Pandemonium, and Cheeseball Presents. And it was something for TV. It just was a funny title, so I threw it in there. Written by Sole as well as Rosemary Ritvo. This was the film debut of Brooke Shields. Obviously, Brooke Shields plays Karen, the person who ends up being murdered within the film. But there is the question that keeps coming up because of what Alice says. Was she actually murdered? Although that's not something that they keep hammering home. It's just kind of something that comes up once, and it's kind of like, if you're in Team Alice, then maybe you believe that Karen didn't actually die. Because I guess we don't see the open casket or anything. Probably wasn't, though, because she was lit on fire. But the film was originally titled Communion, but Soul lobbied for a title change because he didn't want people to assume that this film was a religious type film. Obviously it speaks to religion in a certain way, and it is very much in a religious setting because it has a lot to do with the church. It has to do with communion. But I can understand that you kind of limit your audience when you have certain titles or like say certain things through a title. And apparently the film had switched studios for releasing. So it was at that point that he was like, I think I can lobby to get this changed. I think Alice, Sweet Alice is a pretty good title. Communion, yeah, is not as good a title in my opinion. Interesting slow motion animation style in the very beginning of the film, going from a praying person to someone who then pulls up and is holding a knife. It kind of looked like it was like a stop motion animation, like movement style, but it was obviously like not claymation or anything like that. But it was a really cool image. So like it goes from this kind of like praying, very pious looking person, and then all of a sudden the hands come up in this weird fashion that's kind of like nightmarish and creepy, to be honest, with showing this knife with a glint on the knife, which is a very Giallo thing, by the way. But yeah, very cool way to start it. And I think it says a lot about kind of the message within this film, which is kind of, even though someone goes to church, even though someone appears to be religious and it within the faith and a good person, doesn't mean they actually are a good person. That could be hiding terrible intent, like is the case with Mrs. Tenorti. I have it written down, but I can't remember her name, but we'll get there. But I love that intro, like title screen. Alice is the one to introduce the mask to the film, which shows why many in the film end up assuming that she is the killer. They do go pretty hard at Alice as the red herring, which is obviously the intent in the film, because as the audience, you're supposed to be seeing as many clues or as much evidence against Alice being innocent as the people within the film, as the actual characters. Because it really does feel like even her parents start to question whether or not she did it. And that's a tough situation for an actual parent to be in. Like, obviously, they want to believe that she didn't kill their other child, her sister, but at the same time, like I said, there's a lot of evidence that's kind of pointing that way, and people keep pointing out to them that there's a lot of evidence pointing that way, and the audience sees that because of how they structure the film. You do also, though, see the masks in the front window of a store that Alice ends up looking at one point early in the film, and this kind of indicates, there's a small indication to the audience, these are for sale. Like these are widely available. They're just in the front window of this store. Many people can own these. So that's just like a little message to the audience saying, okay, don't necessarily believe that Alice is the one just because she has this mask. They establish Alice as having a lot of hatred for Karen, which is very important to lead people down that red herring path. She steals her doll early on. She scares her with the mask and then locks her briefly in that warehouse room. And also, as they keep going, like they keep saying that like she's an out of control kid. She does seem to have a real attitude problem. She is acting out, although there are numerous reasons for that, which I'll talk about at the very end of my review of why she may have been acting as suspicious and acting out as much as she was. But yeah, like she has plenty of erratic behavior, mean spirited behavior that goes on without throughout the film. So it's easy to see how the audience members could believe, I mean, yeah, she's got a problem. Plus, they then start introducing the idea that she should be getting psychiatric help. I believe the police are the first ones to say that. The mask, raincoat, and height of the killer choking Karen with a candle indicates Alice as the easy suspect, but the body being picked up would make you think that Alice could not do it. Now, on a first viewing, people aren't necessarily thinking in these terms because they're not like thinking in an analytical way. I know a lot of people approach films just to like relax, take it easy. Obviously, I don't do that because of, doing these reviews, but maybe on a second watch, people would be like, okay, they shot it so it looks like it was like Alice's height, and we already saw her in a raincoat. We already saw her with that mask. So it looks like it could be Alice. But then when you consider that she then like pushes the dead body and then picks the body up and puts it in that like, I don't know, like chest thing and then lights it on fire, like a kid would not be able to do that. Like Alice is dead, or sorry, Karen is dead at this point, and people who are dead weight, and that makes them even heavier. So there's no way that Alice would have been able to pick Karen up. So, just saying. They focus on Alice hiding a veil, which is supposed to seem like it's Karen's veil, and that is also another suspicious thing. That is Alice acting suspiciously, so once again, pointing at Alice. I do love how Aunt Annie tries to rush people along to Mass in a very rude way when they're actually grieving Karen's death. Gives you a good idea of who Aunt Annie is as a character in this film. She's not a likable human being, which is why it does become relatively easy to understand why Alice hates her. But then they use that to kind of point more to, Alice may very well be the killer because we see her having open conflict with Aunt Annie before Aunt Annie gets stabbed. And then once again, there's the yellow raincoat, there's the mask. But yeah. Mr. Alfonso doesn't seem too nice, and just his presence makes you think he'll either be involved or a red herring, or in the instance of what actually happens, a victim. Now, on the note of this guy, I felt like they made him kind of like overly lazy, overly disgusting. Like he literally the whole time has like this giant stain on the crotch of his pants. And he's just laying around the whole time. Like you get the idea that like he's the landlord and like he doesn't actually have a job. He literally does nothing all day except lay around with his cats and maybe listen to music, maybe watch some TV, and just like love the fact that he is the landlord and owns the building and gets to like hassle people within the building for rent. Yeah, quite a character. The police throw out that Alice should have been should have seen a psychiatrist, and this serves to push the audience more towards believing that Alice did it, like I already said. Note that before Aunt Annie gets stabbed, she's in the kitchen cleaning up the mess that she's claiming Alice was, the reason for the dropped milk. She stands up and she's holding a butcher knife or a kitchen knife at that point, a very big one. She pauses with it in her hand in a very menacing pose, and thunder strikes. Now, I believe this is a moment of kind of like a wink to the audience of foreshadowing that she's going to get stabbed with this knife. Or, well, not that particular knife, but a knife like that. She will be stabbed with a knife like that. Because it's not long after that, it's literally like a minute after that, that she's coming down those stairs and she gets like stabbed in the foot and the leg. And that was a pretty brutal scene. Like the way they shot it, it looked chaotic, it looked vicious. But also note that the angle they shot it from does not show the height of the killer. That's something that reoccurs throughout the film is the killer is always shot from interesting angles where you can't actually see the height of the killer in comparison to the person they're going after until we get to the actual scene or sequence where we do end up getting the reveal of who the killer is, which is the death of Dom, Alice's father. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Aunt Annie calls her attacker Alice, but she can't know that for sure, especially since she escapes. It's a very quick thing, and this actually, serves the purpose of kind of talking a little bit about like the reliability of witnesses, even someone who is the victim, in what they see. Like attacks can be super super quick, and in this instance, it is. She didn't have the best angle to see. All she was going off of was, yellow raincoat, mask. That's all she was going off of. It may be the fact that she had just been arguing with Alice, so there's like no tension between the two. So, yeah. Catherine and Dom are understandably unable to believe that Alice is committing violent acts, but that's initially, but they start to kind of question these things. You do see the cracks in the foundations of their belief, their faith, you may even say, in Alice being innocent, which, after all things considered, like, the ending of the film, and you think back, like, that had to be a really hard situation for Alice to go through, to like literally understand that she's being doubted by her own parents. Like, everyone literally thinks she's a murderer and she's not. So it's just like, oh man. The scene of Aunt Annie wailing in the hospital bed is super annoying. It goes on way too long. It has to do with her acting, like how she does it. I was just like, please stop this scene. It's definitely an odd moment when Alice says that Karen stabbed Aunt Annie. And that's the moment that if you're in Camp Alice at that point, you're like, I don't know, well, maybe Karen could still be alive. Maybe there's some sort of weird supernatural thing going on here. We don't know yet. But that doesn't end up being the case. The odd phone calls that Catherine and Dom get remind me a lot of something from a Giallo film. Further, going to why I'm saying this is kind of Giallo-esque. Obviously, I'm not calling it Giallo because it's not an Italian film. It's not, it's definitely like more slasher, but it's obviously pulling plenty of inspiration from Giallo films. Note that they also do the breathing noises inside the mask when they're actually showing from kind of the killer's perspective, which is also a very Giallo thing to do. So once again, another thing taken from Giallo films. The dog's death is pretty I'm sorry, dog's death. Dom's death. Autocorrect. Dom's death is pretty brutal, and that's the reveal of Mrs. Tredoni. That's the name. That's the reveal of Mrs. Tredoni as a killer. That may be, like, as brutal as the attack on Aunt Annie was on the stairs, Dom's attack is even more brutal. And then that's when we get that big reveal, which I was kind of like, really? We're revealing the killer now? Which I understand the reasoning for it, because then you, like, stick with her character and then they kind of slowly give you pieces of what her motive was for doing what she did. But usually with these types of films, it's like just at the very end and then they kind of end it quickly. Like, there was still a half an hour left of the film at this point when they reveal it. I was like, whoa. And that actually made me think that maybe there was going to be an additional twist. Like, maybe there were two killers. Like, maybe it was Miss Tredoni, but it was also Alice at the same time. Like, Alice killed Karen, but then Mrs. Tredoni, like, was dressing up as Alice and going out killing other people to, like, pin it all on Alice. But that didn't end up happening. The scene with Catherine in the kitchen with Mrs. Tredoni starts to give some motive. It's just a little bit. She reveals losing her child on the day of her child's communion and says that she learned that children pay for the sins of her parents, which that tells you immediately why Karen was killed then. And it also makes you think that maybe Alice is in danger potentially, although she's in like actually, is she out of like the psychiatric ward at that point? Or like a juvenile. I don't know what that situation was where she was being kept, but I think it was like kind of like a psychiatric ward type thing. But she eventually gets sent home. So You do get the idea that she was going after Catherine eventually, but she kind of wanted to like kill everyone in her family and then go after her. But like she says, like the children pay for the sins of the parents, so she was obviously going to go for the children first. But I think she was also kind of going for Alice just by the framing of Alice in a sense, because obviously that was a conscious choice. Father Tom is an ass. Catherine asks if she's had her share of tragedy, and he almost yells at her and says there's no such thing as a share. It's basically like he's telling her to just like get over it. This is a woman in grieving. Like, I understand that he's maybe like very worn down by the fact that there have been a lot of people killed, and he's dealing with a lot of people going through grieving, and he's trying to be there for a lot of people. But he kind of like really snaps at her, and he needs to understand how much she's been through. She lost her child. She lost her ex-husband, and she lost her other child basically to basically being assumed to be the killer of her child who's dead. Like, she's lost basically everything, and then she's in crisis, basically like bawling her eyes out, and he's just like, get it together. It's kind of, yeah, he's an ass. I do think Mr. Alfonso was about to get it. Or I did think he was going to end up getting it, but then we find out in an interesting twist that the person in the raincoat and the mask was actually Alice pulling a bit of a prank by putting that jar of cockroaches on him. But he then runs afoul of Mrs. Tredoni, who was there trying to get at Catherine and Alice. Just so happens that they got lucky because they left their apartment in time. And then not lucky for Mr. Alfonso, which, let's be honest, the audience probably didn't care that much that Mr. Alfonso got it at that point because, A, he's been a jerk the whole time, and B, he did some kind of creepy stuff coming at Alice. Well, let's be honest. Pause for horror hydration. Made people think a certain way about him, which is not very well thought of, for sure. Saw it coming that Father Tom would end up getting killed in the end. I like how nobody actually tries to help him at that point. Like, everyone, I understand there's like a moment of shock, but like literally every single person just like stood there and just watched him bleed out, and watched Mrs. Tredoni like get up there and like hug him and have him bleed all over her, which is a really well shot scene. I do love how she's like hugging him and the blood's just like streaming down the back of that yellow raincoat. Looked really, really good. I like that moment. Mrs. Tredoni tries to cleanse the church of sinners, showing that followers of religion can go too far when they come to their own conclusions about what is fair. That it seems like, from what she revealed in the kitchen to Catherine, that she felt like it wasn't fair that she had been through things like losing her child on communion. And then she looks at people like Catherine, who she considers to be a sinner, and I don't know if that's because, I think it may be because she wasn't married anymore. Or I think there was also like a little bit of an indicator that maybe she was having a relationship with Father Tom as well. I don't know for sure, but put it in the comments if you have a solid answer on that one. But yeah, so she basically is like, I'm going to enact justice. Like, I'm now the person dispensing justice against the immoral, against the sinners. So it's crazy. Alice's behavior has potential real reasons, as are revealed as the film progresses. Acting out because of her parents not being together, which is something that's very commonly known that children will do. Jealousy that her sister seems to be the favorite child within the family. And going through the change to womanhood, which they actually bring up in the film, that she was hiding from her parents. So these are legitimate reasons for her to actually be acting out. But it's interesting that they use all of her acting out for potentially these other reasons as a way to kind of like, confuse that with guilt of murder. And it really does just go to show you that, like, you never know. Like, you have to get down to the bottom of things. You have to actually get the facts instead of jumping to conclusions, which people love to do nowadays. Note that they always shoot the killer from odd angles, so you can't actually see how tall they are. Yes, once again, but like I said, when Dom's death happens is when you can clearly see like the body size comparison between Mrs. Tredoni and Dom himself. And that's when you're just definitely like, even before the reveal, you're seeing like, that person's much larger than a child. This gets at a point that just because someone's not a good person doesn't mean they would commit a crime or did commit a crime. So it's this interesting juxtaposition of you have Mrs. Tredoni, who appears to be a very sweet old lady who attends church, who is a very religious, good person, but she's the killer. Versus Alice over here, who is a young child, very bratty, is acting out, pulls pranks on people, is mean to her sister, is a little bit violent towards people at times, and she's just assumed to be the killer. But it's the opposite situation. So it is really an interesting way that they set that up, and I think it works extremely well within the film. So really did enjoy this film. Out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm gonna give it a very good 3.5 star rating. But I would love to know your thoughts on this one. Go ahead and put it in the comments. And should we be talking about this more? Honestly, I feel like we should, because it's pre-Halloween. It's after Black Christmas, before Halloween. Let's talk about Alice, Sweet Alice, people. But like I said, put some comments down there about this film, or really any horror film you want to. Do me a favor, hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It is your best way to repay me if you like this video or any video I've ever done. It really does keep me motivated. And also it's quick, painless, it costs you nothing. So like literally no reason not to do it. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when I'm putting up my new videos, which I'm doing 4 a week at this point, which I think is a good amount. So I appreciate that. But regardless, thanks for taking your time to watch this particular video. And until next time, keep it brutal.